In the classroom, trainees studied enemy propaganda, photography, demolition, and cross-country reconnaissance. The secluded property in Maryland that later became Camp David was used to train OSS officers for service in Europe. The Jedburghs were paramilitary units who operated in France, Belgium, and Holland and worked alongside the local resistance. In addition to their physical training and familiarization with the conditions they would encounter on the ground in Europe, Jedburghs learned French and other languages, as well as how to read maps and compasses and how to use ciphers. They became expert nighttime navigators, parachutists, and radio communicators. These units were also trained to use special weapons, a favorite being the Sten gun. This small submachine gun, nicknamed a pipe-in-bed spring, had 3 important advantages. It was inexpensive to produce, simple to dismantle, and easy to conceal. The training process to become an OSS officer was not easy or conventional. With the outbreak of World War II, President Roosevelt looked to new techniques to take the fight to the enemy. OSS training did the trick.
Well, I don't know if Roosevelt was doing it, but Donovan was doing it. Roosevelt, I don't know, was privy to all this, but welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome. And their training was kind of wild.
It was crazy. One of the places was Camp X up in Ottawa, where a guy that named William Stevenson, a Canadian, was involved in the man known as Intrepid. Out of Canada. The reason we're not covering William is because he is not an American. But thanks for stopping by. So anyway, so Camp X, first of all, the reason they were up there, Camp X, and that's Camp David. There's William Stevenson, by the way, man called Intrepid, close to Donovan, and comes out of, like I said, Canada. Camp X is one of 3 places that they trained. One of them is Camp David, which will become Camp David, that one in the video that you're showing there. And then also Catalina Island by me. Oh. When the last time I was there, I went around to some of the sites on the island left over from World War II, from the OSS stuff. There's kind of like a social club, a men's club, an upscale country club place that they had taken over and used as the officers of OSS to live in it. Which is now some sort of a club. I'm not really sure what it is, a country club. But so they trained in Canada. Now, the reason they trained in Canada was because the British, if they were overthrown or overrun by the Nazis, would create a shadow government in Canada and live on as the British Empire through Canada. They were going to come to Canada. All the high mucky mucks of England would flee, including the royal family, to Canada. So Canada became a base of operations for both British intelligence, who taught us how to do the thing, and us, going up there.
Yeah, it makes sense with the Commonwealth countries.
Right. But it also allowed us to learn, because like I said, I don't know where we left off in episode 1, but we had no intelligence service like the British did. The British had it for 100 years because of the empire. We had, just to set the record straight, 12 different intelligence agencies. Like the Navy had OSS, the Army had their thing, the State Department had their thing. There were 12, right? So dig this. So Roosevelt would get reports from 12 different agencies. That's why Donovan and him, FDR, wanted to create OSS and have and which eventually CIA.
A clearinghouse.
A clearinghouse, but because he was getting thousands of pages, mostly from the military services would come up with mostly military intelligence. So there was really no political intelligence operation. That was kind of in the State Department. But that was sketchy because there were so many commies in the State Department. There were commies in OSS too. I mean, they had infiltrated, vice versa. The OSS had infiltrated the Nazis, and the Nazis immediately infiltrated OSS in 1942. Once they got going, the Nazis immediately infiltrated. I think there were 12 Nazi spies inside the OSS. The OSS, I think, at its height, probably had about 5,000 operatives, 3,000, I'm sorry, 15,000 operatives, and later on was toned down at the end of the war, run out of business by Nutty Truman.
Well, and it wasn't just the Nazis infiltrated back and forth; it was the FBI who infiltrated them too.
Let me tell you something. This battle with Hoover goes on even after the death of William Donovan in 1959. I'll get to that because Hoover was trying to prevent his legacy. Hello, this is J. Edgar Hoover. You have anything on Donovan? Yes, I'm wearing panties right now. That's right. Any problems? Okay, so here's where the rubber meets the road between the two organizations. It's about domestic stuff. And what Donovan wants to do is he wants to, and does, break into foreign embassies on U.S. soil to get their codes. And he doesn't want them to do this, Hoover, because it's the purview of the FBI to break into shit. But FDR says, no, go ahead, break in to like the Spanish embassy in Washington. They broke in doing like a situation like the Watergate break-in into these embassies. And at one point in one of the break-ins, the Metropolitan Police showed up and they barely got away without being arrested. This is a minor story that I uncovered about Donovan. But it was really about power. The feud between Hoover and Donovan was about power, and they hated each other's guts. I mean, Donovan had all the dirt on Hoover, and Hoover kept making up dirt or exaggerating dirt on Donovan that he was having sex with his daughter-in-law, Margaret.
Truman's, daughter-in-law.
No. His own daughter-in-law. He had a his own. No. This became a huge thing. He had a couple of different reporters who reported to him, Hoover, but Donovan had his reporters. So they both had reporters in their corners. And a big name, Kroc from the New York Times was a reporter that worked for Donovan, and Truon, the Washington Times, worked for Hoover. They had their guys, and these battles in the press. Margaret, of course, was the wife of Tom Donovan, his son, who was in the Navy, didn't want to be involved in the family at all, buys a farm with his mother's money in Berryville and just becomes a farmer. The kid, it doesn't really like being in his father's shadow, being the son of a rock star like Donovan. It can be very debilitating to a son, Eric. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like when your father's that famous, the leading war hero in the history of the military, the kid actually does join the Navy.
He gets an award himself, too, if I recall.
Yeah, he does do his job, but his father shows up on one of the ships, and it's kind of embarrassing for the son to be with his dad. But, they were using it for a photo op and blah, blah, blah. But at the beginning, when they start the OSS, I meant to tell you this last week, the OSS, through the government, through FDR, asks the American people for any and all photos they might have of Europe or Turkey or the Middle East or the Baltics. They ask for every photo that people have in their libraries to send into DC so the newly formed OSS can examine them and see, what's behind all these photos, to see what's in there and what they're getting into. So thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans send in their photos to DC of Europe, their own family photos, streets, of houses, of buildings, whatever the hell they had, from vacation, from immigration. It was kind of an interesting thing from the whole world, Eric. I mean, it was kind of like a March of Dimes thing, that they would send these in to the government to be examined. It's kind of interesting.
Clever. I mean, talking about taking advantage of intelligence that's out there, and these are normal people who are vacationing and whatever else. So it's going to be completely under, no suspicion there.
Right. So they also, had them in their attic. It wasn't like they just come back from Europe. These are people who may have had their grandparents immigrate from Minsk, or from Poland. I mean, this is a war that's spread out all over the continent. And what he does, to his credit, like I said last week, Donovan goes around to talk to these national leaders of various countries, telling them that while America is not in the war yet, we will be getting into the war, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of history. So a lot of them try to stall. The Spanish guy. I mean, there's a whole mess of different techniques that countries use. But Finland and Sweden are interesting because Finland takes the side of the Nazis, and so does Sweden. And as the war starts to go the other way, a lot of these countries have a come to Jesus moment with Donovan and the OSS saying, on second thought, we weren't really, I swear to God, they literally say, we really weren't sold on the Nazis completely. I know we told you to go F yourself when you came over here in 43. The Finns, for instance, this is a great little story. The Finns have the Soviet code. They have the Soviet code that they were sharing with the Soviets. So to show that they were willing to give this to Donovan for money. At the end of the war, they started selling everything. And they had the Nazi code, they had the Soviet code. And Donovan said, let's get them all. And Truman and the others said, nah, it's going to offend the Soviets. We don't want to do that. It's a whole long story. It ends up that those were the origins of the Venona cables years later, Eric.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Donovan took the codes and gave them to the Soviets as a gift, saying we didn't even look at them, which was a crock of shit. They said, we don't want an incident here because we're allies now. And that was the possible kerfuffle. So he got them from the Finns. They bought them for $62,500. Where they got that price, I have no idea. But Donovan paid $62,500 in those years. I mean, maybe that's like $500,000 or $400,000 today. I don't know. It's a good chunk of money. But people at the end of the war, is not even at the end, when the tide starts turning, governments start turning. And, they begin to see the handwriting on the walls that maybe the Nazis are not going to win this war. And we have to start doing business with Donovan. So there's that. There's so much stuff that he's involved in. And he's such an American icon because he is completely untrained in what he's doing. He is winging this thing. There is no intelligence service for him to model. So what happens? That's where the British come in. And they teach him, and a guy named Ian Fleming comes over. By the way, Ian Fleming said that that Stevenson was the model for James Bond. That's why he's important. Fleming himself came over. There were two groups. There was the choir boys and the cowboys under Donovan. The choir boys were the scientists, the pencil pushers, the forgers, all of that stuff. And the cowboys were like the Jedburghs. Now you say, who are the Jedburghs? The Jedburghs, which you showed a little clip of in that clip, was named after an obscure, at least obscure to me, Scottish town. This is out to our Scottish friends. The Jedburghs are named after a Scottish town named Jedburgh. If any of our fans in Scotland can report back to us about Jedburgh, that would be appreciated. But the Jedburghs had to have every single thing on them when they jumped out of these planes. They couldn't carry suitcases. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't be seen walking down the road by the Nazis, carrying a radio. So some of these guys weighed 300, 400 pounds with all the crap they had on them. And they were masterful at jumping at night. Now, when you jumped at night, there had to be somebody down there with torches, to see where to land. So Jed Burrow.
Yeah, Ray J's our Scott moderator. So.
Oh, okay. That's good. Jed Burrow. Okay, that's good. That helps. But these guys were called the Jedburghs. I don't even know if I thought that was the town, but I don't know. Okay, so they were called the Jedburghs, and I thought it was named after the town Jedburgh. But okay, Jedburgh. That's good to know. It's like Westboro. Okay, so you had the OG, and I don't mean original gangsters. Those were the operation group. The OG was the operations group. They wore uniforms on purpose, army uniforms. So if they were apprehended, they were not executed by the Nazis under Geneva Convention. But they weren't really in the military. They were OSS. So it was kind of a fake out. And the Germans were always stealing our uniforms. We were stealing their uniforms. Here, this is the Jedburghs loading into a plane for a night drop behind enemy lines. Now, I mean, what they're dropping is a lot of times, I don't know is there a photo of the OGs in a boat, like a bunch of them paddling in a raft? Maybe I sent you that. I don't know if you have that.
Yep.
There's like 30. Okay, these are not U.S. regular Army. These are OSS operations group that wore uniforms for their operations. I don't know if that's kosher, but that's kind of what Donovan came up with. So the Jedburghs were like 3-man teams. There were 53-man teams. And they would get these radios and they'd bury them in various places. How they remembered where they were, I don't know. But they like to use the radios in apartment buildings in Europe. And they like to use women. And one of the main women that they used was a woman. I don't know if you have this picture of her. Her name was Virginia Hall. Virginia Hall, he used a lot of women, Donovan, a lot of gorgeous women. That was his MO. And I don't mean that in a sexual way. He just felt that they were able to charm the Nazis and by themselves. Yeah, this is Virginia Hall. Now, the reason I point this out is she's operating a radio out of an apartment. And the reason they used buildings was they couldn't focus on exactly where in the building was the radio. It bought them some extra time. But I wanted to point out her assistant, the local guy with the bicycle. Dig where the power is coming from for the radio. Look at the guy with the bicycle pedaling backwards.
Yeah, cranking.
He's cranking amps for that radio to work. And I went, holy crap. Today, we use that to cook crystal meth here in LA. We use the bicycle method.
Adaptation over time.
Over time, it's now used to churn and cook the meth. But the Donovan, this is a great story. Donovan you saw that machine gun he invented there. That was invented by Mitch Werble, who will later come to fame in the JFK assassination folklore for being involved in creating silencers. Here's one of the women. Yeah, show a couple of these women who are involved. This is one of the radio operators behind enemy lines. This is another OSS woman operating in an urban environment in Europe. These would buy them some time among the Germans. Now, her maybe not so much, but the reality of it is, yeah, she's a looker. So they would buy themselves some time and be able to at least possibly escape or seduce some of the Germans. Now you say, well, the Germans, why would they be horny? Well, one of Donovan's plans and one of his episodes was to drop letters, handwritten letters from the League of Lonely Women. Is this one of them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. From the phony League of Lonely Women looking for men back in Berlin. This is a part of the psychological warfare that Donovan had come up with all his different men coming up with. He had psychologists on the payroll. My favorite was John Steinbeck among the writers. He had Thornton Wilder, the playwright. I mean, they were writing these things. I mean, he had John Ford, the director, is instrumental in all types of war propaganda filming because they worshipped, and I don't mean that in a good way, they worshipped the propaganda efforts of Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels was their leader. Obviously they would have killed him, but John Steinbeck comes up with the best one I ever heard, who will later become friends with LBJ, John Steinbeck. But he wanted to drop tiny grenades on the town so children can toss them off their rooftops onto the Nazis. And I thought they rejected that one. But what they did invent was the Beano grenade. I don't know if you have a picture of that round grenade, because they had tried to throw grenades at a convoy. There's a little round grenade. There it is. That's the button compass on the bottom. And that is what's known as the Beano grenade. And that was invented by what's-his-face, the guy who was his Moriarty that we covered last week, the scientist. Oh, by the way, there's a great book on this, on Stanley Lovell is the guy I'm talking about. This book here is just about the dirty tricks and the inventions by Stanley Lovell for the OSS. And in there is the Beano grenade. And the Beano grenade, that's Lovell there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a freaky dude. The Beano grenade explodes on pressure. And the other grenades, as you're well aware, Hunley, having been in the military, is you pull the pin and you throw the grenade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they did that to a convoy of German soldiers, and it bounced off the trucks, and they got machine gunned to death. So this guy, Lovell, comes up with a pressure grenade. When it hits something, it blows things to smithereens. Unfortunately, one of the younger guys on the test line threw it up in the air and caught it and blew himself to smithereens right in front of all of them.
There's always one.
This was the one. He just tossed it up like a baseball, and they went no, and he caught it and went boom. He was gone. He was gone.
I had a guy I went to school with in the military. He was a former drill instructor. Big dude, about 6'5", muscled out like crazy, and he wore double hearing aids. He had to be retrained because his hearing got blown completely out. Apparently, one of the recruits threw a grenade.
No,
it was too whippy for it to go over the wall, so it bounced back at them. And he had to dive and cover, and it ruined his career. So that's why I was like, there's always one.
There's always one. Well, this was the one. I don't know what his name was, but they I just want to tell you the people, getting back to the people who are in the OSS, who you may know. And I just want to go into this movie a little bit, The Good Shepherd, which I looked at. I hadn't seen it in a long time. I watched it last night. But Ralph Bunche, I think he was one of the founders of the NAACP, was in there. Julia Child. That's right, Julia Child, who made a chicken for Dan Aykroyd. She was in there. Arthur Goldberg, who became a Supreme Court justice and a communist. He was a labor leader, labor union leader, lawyer, who may have gone too far in terms of giving secrets to the Soviets, but that's a story for another day. Sterling Hayden comes to fame in movies like I want to say The Manchurian Candidate or 7 Days in May. No, what am I thinking of? I'm thinking of Sterling Hayden as General Ripper in Dr. Strangelove. There's a lot of different performances by Hayden. Brilliantly becomes a OSS member, gives up his career and joins the OSS. Tall guy who will later become famous as General Jack Ripper.
That's right. He that's right. He quit acting to go to OSS for a while.
Yeah.
It was so boring.
Yes, he hated acting. He ends up living on a houseboat in Amsterdam at one point. There's a documentary, if anybody can find it, on Sterling Hayden in the 70s, living on a houseboat in Amsterdam, and they come to interview him. It is the craziest documentary of any actor I've ever seen. Completely out of his mind, obviously a total alcoholic by that point, but General Jack Ripper in Strangelove. So that's who these guys are. He has Arthur Schlesinger, as the famous JFK historian, with him. And he's got three other guys who will later become the heads of the CIA working under them. He has William Colby, he has Richard Helms, and he has William Casey. All three will become heads of the CIA, and Alan Dulles, the number 4. All 4 of those guys worked under Donovan. There's Helms, of course. He's like giving the finger to Congress. There's William Casey, who just mumbled. Nobody understood one word Casey said. And there's of course, Colby. So all 4 of these guys will work as lieutenants under Donovan. Now, Donovan will be boxed out of the CIA because he is a political, not dinosaur, he's a political threat to Truman. And Truman says that. Truman is so petty. And it reminds me of today. It reminds me of Biden so much because he's so politicized, Truman, that he won't let this guy who is best friends, like FDR and Donovan were Democrat and Republican. You couldn't get further apart politically. Donovan was a conservative Republican, FDR, obviously a communist. And here, this is Truman giving him a medal to say goodbye to him. You know, he shows up to get this stupid medal from Truman, and Truman offers him a job. You can't make this up. He offers him a job to go around the country and check on the fire departments of the country and see that they're. I swear to God. And he takes the job. He takes the job, Donovan, thinking I got to keep, a foot in public life. So I'm going to take this job checking out fire departments around the country after the war. I mean, just very, very few people remember that.
That's why Truman's laughing there.
Truman's probably laughing.
The sucker's going to take it.
He actually took it. But, oh, what a dick Truman was. He was so petty. And so many times he would get on a pity pot about himself, where he'd just go, this job was foisted on me. I never asked for this job. I can't take this aggravation anymore. Everybody's putting pressure on me. Shit, what a douche. So he picks this guy. You're talking about an obscure pick. Nobody even remembers this. Maybe somebody on Jeopardy might remember it, like my brother. Roscoe Hillenkoetter. He was an admiral. Roscoe Hillenkoetter becomes the first director of CIA. And he goes from May of 47 to October of 1950 because they didn't want to give it to Donovan. After that, it'll be Dulles. But nevertheless, Eisenhower will come into power for 8 years and the tone will change.
Wow.
But the OSS calculated, and this is where they had a lot of big statisticians working for them. They calculated that 1 million allies would be killed during the invasion of Japan. And they're the ones who are running the numbers on the invasion. Later, of course, they used the H-bomb, the atomic bomb, and then the rest is history. The Japanese finally surrender in September. Is this the guy?
That's Roscoe.
Yeah, he didn't want it. He didn't need it. But there's also another great, couple of great stories. A lot of the success of Donovan is in northern Burma and in the Japanese, Chinese theater, right? So, and also there's, he goes around to different areas. These are all the places, if you could zoom in on that. This is all the places where OSS was operating. And look how many there are, and look where they are. This was the bulk of OSS because he goes, for instance, General Patton welcomed him, but a lot of the other generals did not want a spy. What's that?
Like MacArthur didn't let him.
Anyway. MacArthur definitely didn't let him because MacArthur had Willoughby, and Willoughby was pegged as he was called the stupidest intelligent man in the military. That's what they called Willoughby. And he had Willoughby, and Willoughby didn't want OSS. They didn't want Donovan. And this happened a lot. Patton, to his credit, didn't give a shit until the very end when they were starting to rout the enemy. They wanted to take the glory, Eric. So they didn't want this non-military group. But even with Patton, Donovan's men cleaned up the rear of Patton's rear and were able to execute Nazis who were trying to do sabotage against Patton's rear guard. They go into the death camps, and Patton liberates them and then puts SS in charge, which is another crazy story. But one of the guys, I'll tell you, talk about the Nazis. He will end up with what's his name? The Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson will be picked to run the Nuremberg trials, and that will involve Donovan too. But I'll get to that in a second. Donovan used different people who came from the countries they were in exile from, and one of the Polish exiles was a guy named Leon Adrian. Leon Adrian was a wily young guy who's untrained, was not an Ivy League person, was not an intellectual, but he had the incredible ability to see, count, and record military hardware being put on trains. This was his superpower, and able to count, record, and write it down and draw maps of where and what exact the armaments were. He was able to look at a thing and say, that's 82 tons of coal going into Austria. That was his superpower. So he goes to this train station. This is at the very end of the war, but this is January of 45. This is January.
Is it like eidetic memory?
Something. I'm not really sure. It's like February of 45. So the war's still going on. And he's in Germany. He's in Eastern Germany. He's a Pole. And Leon Adrian is drawing a map of the train station and all the different armaments that are going on and where they're going. And he gets the guy running the train station calls the police. He's picked up by the Gestapo. And as the Gestapo is about to arrest him, he tears the map and the document into a billion tiny little pieces and eats it, right? He goes and tears it up, eats it all. Well, that doesn't stop the Nazis. They inject him with a drug to make him puke up his guts. So he's laying on the ground, and they take him and they inject him, and he pukes up a certain amount of stuff, but not the hundreds of little pieces of paper that he tore up. So the Nazis lay him out, and they take these giant rubber rollers that you would use, and they're rolling these rollers over him from toe to head like he was dough, being cooked for bread. These giant rollers to make him puke up the rest of his stuff, right?
Wow.
So, no, dude. And then they're shoving hoses down his throat. This is all at the train station, right? They take him back to the police station, and they continue now to roll him with these rollers. And he finally pukes up all the hundreds of little papers, and the Nazis go through the little papers from the vomit, from the bile, and glue them all together and get this map together that the guy had created and eaten. That's how strong the intentions were of the Nazis and the Gestapo, and how, they left no stone unturned. So they beat him every single day for 6 days, torturing him to give up more information. And he never talks. They got the map, but he's beaten for 6 consecutive days, head to toe with these rods, with these rubber and steel rods. And he's in his cell. He can't walk. His legs are gone. And all of a sudden, on the 6th day, he's about to die. And all of a sudden, B-17 liberators bomb the building, and his jail door blows off the hinges.
Oh,
and
wow.
Eric, he walks out of his jail cell. The door is blown off. The building's blown up. He walks out, and he goes and finds the American division that's on the ground, and he tells them who he is, OSS, and they take him under their wing, and they begin to heal him, and they begin to give him first aid. Well, a couple of weeks later, they're rounding up SS and Gestapo, right? So they bring him in, and he fingers X amount of these guys who are Gestapo, make him believe they're not Gestapo. And he's going, no, that's Gestapo. And you know what? Those are the guys who I remember they were Gestapo and they were beating me. And they go, oh, really? That's really interesting, Leon. Thank you. So he's standing behind one of the MPs while they're interrogating the Gestapo. And without the guy noticing, he pulls out his .45 automatic, walks over to the 2 Gestapo guys, and puts a bullet in each of their heads. And then he says, now you don't have to worry about these guys being repatriated as Nazis. And they went, okay. And he got his revenge on the guys that actually tortured him right in that room.
Wow.
I know.
I can't believe he lived through that.
He lived through the whole thing, and he later went back to Poland. It's one of the most amazing OSS stories. But another great story is when that silencer, the suppressor, is developed. Donovan put it on his .22, put it into his shoulder holster, and walked with a sandbag into the Oval Office. He walks into the Oval Office with a sandbag. He drops the sandbag on the floor. There's FDR busy, doesn't even look up. And he just goes, hey, how's it going there, Donovan? And he goes, pretty good, sir. He doesn't even look up. He's writing a letter. And he walks behind FDR. And he's walking around the Oval Office. He's just, and he's waiting for FDR to see him. And he's got this, he doesn't even see the sandbag. He drops the sandbag right there on the floor. He goes behind FDR. He takes out the .22 with the silencer on it, and he pumps 4 bullets into the sandbag without Roosevelt even hearing it. Doesn't even hear it. And he walks around, he picks up the sandbag, and the sand is flowing out of 4 bullet holes. And he just says, what was that, my friend? And he says, that is a silencer, sir. And he takes out the gun and shows him. And he says, FDR is amazed that he didn't even hear it. And he says, we're going to have to pat people down before they come in here in the future.
Yeah. Just so you're thinking, it's the president of the Oval Office. I can only imagine. Good thing there, friends. Holy God.
Right. Right. Well, anyway, that's how he demonstrated the silencer. And then they ordered a ton of them, and they began to use them all over Europe. And, and they were very effective. But the real work that he did was in northern Burma, where the Kachin and some of those tribal groups were fighting the Japanese, and they worked with them to make, like, I don't know, those bamboo traps where you'd step on a thing and then you'd be sliced up by all the bamboo spears. They were making those. They were arming the Kachin fighters in northern Burma, and there he goes and meets, Zhou Enlai and Chairman Mao. And Mao and Chow begin to help him to fight the Japs. And they're on his side, and they are exchanging intelligence against the Japanese, and he's giving them he's giving them stuff that we're doing, and he gets along with Mao.
Didn't he go to Mao after he got tired of the original, the other Chinese guy, because they were in a battle themselves, not really putting forth any effort or do anything? So he's like, okay, let me go talk to the other guy.
Yeah, no, there was a guy, there was a tribal guy, one of the leaders, and he was screwing him around. I mean, the entire game that they were playing was like, I'm trying to get as much out of you without giving up as much as I want to you in these exchanges. He does it with the Soviets. He will later do it with Hermann Goering. When he's a prisoner, Hermann Goering, he wants Goering to cop a plea. I'll get to that in a little while, but that's just a fascinating thing. But I wanted to get to the second area of their work, which is North Africa, and an operation called Operation Torch. An Operation Torch. Well, these two areas were really where the OSS shined, was in North Africa and also in northern Burma. The rest of the world was covered with physical soldiers, so they couldn't put up with that fight. But this is kind of where they operated beyond enemy lines.
Thank you, Tim. Chiang Kai-shek.
Chiang Kai-shek, yeah, right. But there's also Zhou Enlai, who is going to come into play in Vietnam, because Donovan will eventually go to Vietnam and help the French after Bien Phu and all that stuff happens. The severe losses by the French are. He puts all his eggs in the DM basket, by the way. He believes that DM is going to be the leader that they could deal with, and he does become the leader they could deal with until the two DM brothers are executed, despite JFK saying don't touch them, and they kill them immediately. But so anyway, so the Operation Torch in North Africa becomes a big deal because they go behind enemy lines there. And the invasion of Italy is also a big deal for OSS. He takes Italians, he takes mobsters, he takes people who know Sicily out of New York, and he begins to use them in Italy as interpreters, and also people who know the lay of the land in Sicily and some of the other areas that the invasion is beginning to happen. So he goes with an orderly in a Jeep, Donovan. Now keep in mind, he's 60 years old. This is not the Donovan from Verdun, and this is not the Donovan from Dunkirk or the World War I. This is Donovan who's 60 and a little wide around the middle, which you can't see in that photo. But he's in a Jeep with a kid, and the kid is the driver, and they come. The invasion is well underway into Italy, and they feel pretty cocky. And he says, he keeps wanting to go to the front, no matter what's going on. And they keep saying, "Do you have your pill, sir?" And maybe you could show what the guy invented, the L pill. If you see a picture of it, it's a case. Here's the L pill. It's a suicide pill. That Donovan. That word, though. That's why it was called the L pill. L pill, right? The L pill. The L pill. L pill. L pill, designed by OSS. He said he didn't have it. And he tells the kid, he says, "Don't worry, I will shoot you in the head first because I'm your commanding officer, and then I'll shoot myself." So the kid goes, "What?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, I forgot to take the pills, so this is what we'll do. Don't worry about it. I don't intend to get caught." And all of a sudden, they turn a corner, and there's like 30 Italian regular soldiers armed to the teeth. And he takes his machine gun, Donovan, and he kills like 25 of them in like multiple gun bursts. And the kid is like shooting a 45 caliber automatic at the Italians. They capture about 5 and they kill about 25. And Donovan kills about 20 of them. And the kid was completely stunned how quickly this happened, how quick on the trigger William Donovan was at the age of 60, mowing down young Italian regulars from the army.
He is a World War I veteran. He knew what he was doing.
Right. Well, he wanted to get into battle, but they kept telling him, sir, if you're caught, you know everything. We can't allow you to be caught, so we can't allow you to go on these missions. And he wouldn't even take the pill with him. He would just, forget about it. But he never did get caught. But he was a sloppy administrator, Eric. He was a sloppy. At one point, I think it was in Czechoslovakia, he goes out night clubbing and, of course, leaves his briefcase in the hotel. They steal all the documents. It becomes like a big deal, embarrassment, because he's out partying with these women. And there's spies that are cleaning his clock. German spies from the Abwehr and other, smaller countries have their own spy groups, and they're all he's winging it. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He starts this thing on a lark, and he makes a lot of mistakes. To be frank, he really does. But there's nobody else to do it. So, he had to be able to pull this off. And if you look at some of these documents, which I posted for locals members, some of these got declassified. These are PDFs I put up. These are secret PDFs that break down the structure of OSS, for instance. They're so complicated. These weren't declassified till 2013, Eric.
Yeah, I was noticing that.
These were
10 years ago.
Yes, they kept this. They did not want this out there, and it's how to commit maritime sabotage. If you're a locals member, you'll have access to these PDFs. I put up about 6 of them yesterday. These are top secret documents that were finally cleared in 2013. This is the operational group command structure of OSS. Very complex stuff. I was reading it last night. The organizational charts and everything else. This will eventually lead to CIA. But interestingly enough, one of the first acts that Donovan does when he creates this the OSS is he sends out a scientist, and he says, "What do you want me to do, Chief?" He says, "I want you to get this new thing called Bayer aspirin from the Germans, and we're going to break it down and make our own aspirin and find out how the hell this works." And he sends a guy out to the pharmacy to get Bayer aspirin so they could break it down and copy it. Because you were just buying Bayer aspirin, but nobody ever took it apart. The first thing he does is take apart Bayer aspirin.
Guess he had a headache, man.
The whole job was a headache. But Marlene Dietrich worked for him. Like I said, Thornton Wilder worked for him. There was a lot of famous people. But I just wanted to get into this movie thing for a second, because Mo Berg, of course, the polyglot Mo Berg, mostly a catcher for the Boston Red Sox, but he caught for other teams. Mo Berg, at one point, goes over to Japan in the offseason. The champions, or an all-star team of major league players, would play the Japanese. And he went on the rooftop and he took pictures of all the Japanese military. This is before 1941. Like 38, 37, 38, he went over there with the Major League Baseball All-Stars. Mo Berg will later try almost to assassinate the German designer of their A-bomb. He tracks him at a conference, and he has orders to assassinate him if he produces certain equations that would indicate that they were onto the A-bomb. And he doesn't do it, but he said reluctantly that he would kill this guy, a German scientist.
Wow.
Anyway, Mo Berg was Jewish, spoke, I think, 10 languages, brilliant guy, and a great catcher, great hitter, played for the Red Sox and a couple other teams I don't recall right now. That's his baseball card. But he was also working for Donovan and used his language skills as part of his way to find out different things. So it was good to have language skills to get into the OSS, and also knowledge of the region of where they were, because they didn't know where the hell they were half the time. Especially,
I think his being an amateur in a weird way might have been beneficial, because like he hired safecrackers. He hired all kinds of crazy people with crazy backgrounds and things like that. So maybe it was good that he didn't know what he was doing.
It was good and bad. Yeah, it was good and bad. He was gung ho. He didn't have any rules. A lot of people, including Hoover and others in the political world, the Democrats thought he was beholden to the British, and they were using him and manipulating him for their own purposes, which was true. Churchill was all over him. He became very tight with Churchill. He became very tight with Ian Fleming, the Sir Ian Fleming, I guess, according to our British friends. Could tell me if he's a sir. I think he's a sir. But anyway, he became tight with these guys, and they did use him to influence FDR. No doubt about that. But he also used the British to learn how to create a spy agency, which we didn't have. So the entire CIA, the entire OSS is modeled after SIS and some of the British intelligence operations that SOE, British intelligence, and they opened their doors to him too. I mean, it wasn't, they needed him because they needed our money, they needed our weapons, and they needed to stay in power. And they were hinging, they were teetering on the brink of disaster, Eric, And the British government could have toppled at any time before we came into this thing. I mean, he eventually is given the 4th medal almost on his deathbed when he was in Walter Reed at the end of his life, the National Security Medal, which they had to clear, I guess, with Dulles for some reason. I'm not really sure. 1959. That gave him the top 4, the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, and the Distinguished Service Medal, the National Security Medal. I guess that was all 4.
Is this out of sequence? I want to make sure that we didn't miss him. But
no, but I was getting into Burma. That's Vinegar Joe. That's the general that I was talking about. General Vinegar Joe Stilwell, who embraced Donovan, as opposed to MacArthur, who repelled Donovan. Stilwell here, he was fighting the Japs up in Burma, which is brutal, in the jungle, Eric, right? And all of a sudden he shows up with his OSS, and Stilwell embraced him. They became very close. Like I said, the generals in Europe did not really embrace him. Although, what's his name? Mountbatten, Lord Mountbatten said, "I will help you if you help me." And he says, "Well, how can I help you?" And he says, "I want 4 tickets to Oklahoma on Broadway." And he goes, "Nobody can get those damn tickets, Mountbatten." And he says, "Well, mate, I can't help you." And he says, "Damn it, Mountbatten." He says, "I can't get tickets like that. It's been sold out for 1.5 years. And he says, "Well, son, good luck. Good luck, mate." So a week later, they're in New York, and he shows up in Mountbatten's office, and he's got 6 tickets to Oklahoma, 4 hot chicks, and money and a restaurant for Mountbatten to party in. So he goes to Oklahoma with 4 of the girls and 2 of him and another guy, and they go to this restaurant to party. And when they come out of the party, there's the paparazzi out in the street in New York at the restaurant. And he says, "I'm finished, Donovan." And Donovan's men grab the photographers and yank their film. And he goes, "Now you owe me, Mountbatten." He goes, "You're right, son, and I will deliver."
Wow.
I mean, that's the type of shit that he was doing. I mean, that's the type of stuff that you can't write a book about. How do you do this? You know what I mean? Like, here's Dulles. He's in Italy, and they tell him, "Look, we want an unconditional surrender. Nobody makes any deals. We don't want to offend the Soviets. We're going to do this thing by the book." So what does Dulles do? Dulles, by the way, predicted that the German army would collapse. So he was wrong about that. Dulles is ensconced in his own OSS in Bern, Switzerland. He creates, with the tutelage of Donovan, he creates his own Bern OSS division out of Switzerland. Okay, so he ends up in Italy, and he gets this guy, Oberstoffer Wolf, one of the head SS generals, which we covered, I think, in another episode. But Wolf and him become best friends. And Wolf he's killed 300,000 Jews, by the way, by shipping them to different concentration camps. And he's enamored with Wolf. He says Wolf knows what wines to drink. He knows recipes. He loves Beethoven and Bach. This is a really cultured man who we can work with. This is a bloodthirsty war criminal murderer named General Wolf. But to make it even worse, Wolf is buttering him up because he wants to, come over to the Allies' side. He knows the war's over. And he starts to negotiate a settlement, a surrender to Dulles. And this almost blows everything to smithereens because Dulles had no authority to do this. And the information starts leaking out. The Soviets find out about it. They lose their shit because they're supposed to be in on this together. And Dulles almost loses his entire history, not his history, his future with the CIA.
All for the love of a Nazi.
Right. But Dulles, you could see the difference between these two men. Dulles came from the banking world. He came from this other world, not from the world of Donovan. They were polar opposites. And this is the type of guy who will later be involved in CIA chicanery and CIA political assassinations. Is that Wolf?
Yeah.
Oh, he was a good Nazi. You could take a look. You could tell the good Nazi. Anyway, so last night I'm watching this movie, The Good Shepherd. Now, The Good Shepherd, I think it came out in 2006, 2005, is the story of James Angleton. It's a story of James Jesus Angleton in a way, a little bit of Richard Bissell. But Matt Damon, there's the Good Shepherd here. Matt Damon, Angelina Jolie plays his wife. Robert De Niro plays William Donovan, which is why I'm mentioning this. Eric Roth wrote the script. It's based on a book. The movie's like 3 hours long, but it's really well shot by Richardson, Robert Richardson, who also, the DP is Robert Richardson. So it looks like JFK, the movie, which is Richardson lights a certain way, which if you know DPs and you know what the look of JFK, that's what De Niro wanted as a director. And it looks a lot like JFK because of Richardson, who was Oliver's favorite DP, by the way. So it's a little side note. But anyway, so Matt Damon plays this guy, and we go back in time because it starts at the Bay of Pigs, the movie, but we go back to the period we're talking about today. And in that time, you see Matt Damon as Angleton, who worked in OSS under Donovan. You see Donovan recruiting him. He's coming out of Yale. You see the Skull and Bones situation, that the Skull and Bones rituals at Yale. For all you Skull and Bones freaks, this is the movie for you. So he's being urinated on from above and blah, 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 whatever. He joins the Skull and Bones, Angleton, and he's brought a woman, Angelina Jolie, and he has sex with her and impregnates her right away. And Angelina Jolie's brother is Senator John Russell's fictional character. John Russell Jr. is the brother of Angelina Jolie. And Angelina Jolie marries Matt Damon, and that's the wife of James Angleton. But the brother in the movie, and this movie has a lot of stars, the brother, I almost fell off the couch, is Gabriel Macht, shown here from last week's episode. Gabriel Macht is the uncle of Jonathan Macht, who kept jumping the fence at the RFK compound in Brentwood. So again, he plays a CIA operative, the uncle, in the definitive movie about the OSS. I just thought I had to tell you guys that. Now, William Hurt will play Alan Dulles. There's even a Billy Crudup, great performance as Kim Philby, the British spy. And Timothy Hutton plays James Forrestal, who it'll end badly for Forrestal a couple of years later. There's a guy named Richard Hayes plays Richard Helms. And then there's the two Galitzins. There's there's a Galitzin, and there is another one named Nosenko. Nosenko, they were both defectors. And these two defectors, Soviet defectors, played us like a fiddle. And the Angleton character believed Galitzin was real, and he believed Nosenko was a plant. And that's what drove Angleton insane, that there was a mole inside the CIA. And it turned out that they tortured Nosenko, Yuri Nosenko, who claimed he had a file on Lee Harvey Oswald, that Oswald did not kill JFK. And they knew this in the KGB. And Nosenko was tortured for years in an attic in Maryland by Angleton and the CIA. And I mean tortured. While the other guy was really the mole, who was Golitsyn. But that's a story for another day. But anyway, this is depicted in the movie really well. And there's also a guy shows up who hadn't worked in 10 years. And he's called on the phone to be an actor in this movie. And his name is Joe Pesci. And Joe Pesci, yeah. Joe Pesci gets the call from De Niro. And De Niro and Pesci are in the same movie. And Pesci had given up acting, hadn't worked in 8 years. And he plays, even though they say it's Trafficante, Giancana combo, it's really Carlo Gambino, the character he's playing, because there's a beach outside his house. And he walks outside his house, and there's the beach and the ocean, which you didn't really have in Chicago. And I know that because when we were kids, when we would take a motorboat, we would play a game of chicken with Gambino's men with machine guns who would come down to the shoreline in Tow Bay on Jones Beach, and we would take a motorboat and go right up to the shoreline of his house, which was right on the water in Massapequa. So the layout in the movie makes it look more like Carlo Gambino. And they want the help. Here's Nosenko. Nosenko, who is depicted by a guy who looks just like him in the movie, was tortured unmercifully. And he was the real guy who was the real defector, in my opinion. I think this is a very, very highly contested, to this day, debate as to which one was real and which one was a phony defector, or maybe both were phony defectors. There's arguments on all sides. The NKVD, which will later become the KGB, the NKVD is who Donovan was fighting, and Donovan wants, this is crazy, there's the logo of the NKVD. This is crazy. Donovan wants to allow their spies free reign in Washington if they will give us free reign in Moscow. So it's not that crazy. He goes to them and says, look, you let us in, we'll let you in. We'll know who you are, you know who we are. And Hoover hears this and goes ballistic. Hoover begins to leak it to the press to this guy Truan at the Washington Times, and they begin their campaign to undermine and destroy his credibility, Donovan, because of this crazy idea, which wasn't that crazy at all, because they were in here anyway. And Donovan said, look, we got spies, you got spies. You know, this will save the trouble of us accidentally running into each other and killing each other. But anyway, there's scenes in this movie where that type of thing happens. There are guys who Angleton meets his counterpart from the KGB in the movie, and his son becomes a KGB agent. So, I mean, it's a little long. It's about 255 minutes. But if you're interested in this subject matter from this episode, it might be a great place for you to have a look at the movie. It's a beautiful looking movie. There's more stars in this movie than I've seen.
Hell of a cast.
It's an insane cast because he is Robert De Niro. And when you're a star at that level and you're going to direct, you can call in anybody to be in your cockamamie movie. But it's Eric Roth wrote Forrest Gump and a lot of other movies. And it's based on a book. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this semi-fictionalized movie version of OSS and the beginning of the CIA. And like I said, it opens with the Bay of Pigs, kind of ends with the Bay of Pigs, 61 and 62. But the rest of it is OSS. So I highly recommend if you're looking for a film this weekend to have a look at that one. However, on this particular story, as the war comes to an end, like I was getting to, they begin to round up the Nazis. And there's a debate as to what to do with these Nazis. And this is where they begin to bring in this guy this is unbelievable. I mean, if you think about it today, this guy, if you can show a picture of Robert Jackson grows up in Western New York and knows Donovan his whole life. He is a Supreme Court judge. He leaves the Supreme Court. He gets up, leaves the Supreme Court, goes to Germany to put the Nazis on trial, right? He's a liberal Democrat, and on the other side is this Republican conservative, William Donovan. And they know each other. They've run against each other politically. I mean, he used to be a political guy, Jackson, in Western New York. So they know each other, but he doesn't know anything about what's going on over there. and under his wing. And Donovan opens up every door for him in Europe. Says, hey, this is Jackson. He's going to be doing this. You guys get to know Jackson. And the research is done on the Nazis. The legal research is done by OSS. And Donovan, who can't follow orders from anybody, tries to put himself in charge of this thing and starts butting heads with Robert Jackson. And one of the heads they butted over was Hermann Goering. And he has these dinners. He sits down, he's talking to Hermann Goering every day like he's his friend. And what he wants, it's not that he's friends with Goering. He wants Goering to cop a plea and to turn on the rest of the Nazis and say, yes, we were evil incarnate, and whatever the deal was, he wanted to cut a life imprisonment deal, I presume, with Hermann Goering. And Goering, is pacing around his cell, and he's writing a little bit, but he's meeting with Donovan every day. Donovan's just right there in the building.
Oh, I thought it was he wanted to select how he was executed.
No, that was one of the offers. That wasn't right. That was just part of it. Right. It was firing squad versus hanging, and everybody would rather have the firing squad than the hanging, right? So that was one of the offers, and he was saying, well, you got to do better than that. You know what I mean? Like, that was the opening gambit. But it doesn't really go much further because Jackson flips out that he's trying to cut deals with the Nazis, but his intention is good too, Donovan, because he believes that if you try them independently, it's going to be a mishmash. And what he wants is the top Nazi to undermine and say we were bloodthirsty psycho animals. And they never he will take the stand and not do it, Goering. He will snicker, he will laugh, he won't do it. Because what happens is they get into a huge fight, Jackson and Donovan, over this particular thing. And Goering will eventually somehow get the cyanide pill and kill himself. Highly debatable how he got it. His guard, apparently one of the U.S. soldiers, was claimed to have given it to him, and that part is history. But he is kicked off of the Nuremberg trial group by Jackson, Donovan, because he cannot follow orders, and he writes him the nastiest letter, Jackson, saying, we have grown apart when we don't see eye to eye on this or anything else. I can't work with you. Here's Hermann Goering, had the largest art collection of any of the Nazis. And Donovan was also in charge in re-seizing the artwork that Goering had stolen and shipping it back to the United States and eventually repatriating the art, which is a subject for a whole other story. But Goering, who weighed 360 when he went into jail, lost a ton of weight. He looked great at the end. In fact, he stayed on Weight Watchers right to the gallows. I think it was. He looked great. But anyway, so Goering had all these meds. By the way, they had him on. He was on codeine. They let him have everything. He was a morphine addict, but they let him have his drugs, which was kind of interesting. He had a shitload of morphine and codeine, and he was taking it every day.
Hospitality.
Anyway, so Jackson gets into this huge fight with Donovan, and Donovan now is financially broke because he has spent all his own money to live and to spend on these operations, out-of-pocket money. So he hasn't been with his law firm for years. The law firm has no clients. He goes back to New York, and he is with his daughter-in-law. Now, this becomes a bone of contention with the daughter-in-law, because the daughter-in-law is a stunning blonde who's married to his son. The daughter-in-law works for OSS, becomes his personal assistant, travels with him around the world personally, right? And he's clearly a ladies' man. One guy named Waller, who's one biographer, said they were intimate, but they didn't have sex. There's all different reasons, but didn't stop J. Edgar Hoover, who kept leaking that he was having sex with his daughter-in-law. So Hoover used it to undermine Donovan, and the press ran with this thing that he was with Margaret. Margaret will later commit suicide. Oh, sorry. She will later, whatever she did to herself, with barbiturates and alcohol. There's so many people who do this. I don't know what their problem is with this one word. But anyway,
I know.
It's just so crazy. I don't understand what it's like they're obsessed with this one freaking word.
Mm-hmm.
So bizarre. Anyway, so she offs herself, and now Donovan, the story comes up again that she did this because of him. He's completely separate from his wife. Not that they're fighting or anything, but his wife has a separate life, and the wife falls off a horse, gets addicted to pain medication, does not off herself, outlives Donovan by a lot of years, gets into horseback riding. She has her money. I mean, when he passes away, he owes the IRS money, but he has an estate that's worth only, and I say only, $180,000 in $1959. So multiply that by 8.
About $1 million or so. Yeah.
Right. But he had millions. He did have millions. And not that he squandered it away or anything. He just used it for all these operations, and he didn't care. He didn't care. Plus, he wasn't working. He was doing this. You know what his salary was? It was $10,000 a year, from the government. And that's how much he made from the U.S. government. So anyway, so he is in Italy, and this is like April 45, I say, and he's beginning to put together these documents of the future CIA. Puts together the entire document and even writes the actual presidential order for FDR to sign. He says, I'm going to make it easy for you. I'm going to write this one pager. You just sign on the bottom. We're good to go. I'm the head of CIA, right? So he goes to bed, and first Hoover gets a hold of this. I don't know how. And he leaks it to Truan and to some of these other media people. And they say that Donovan is trying to set up a Gestapo in the United States. And this becomes a huge scandal because they already have a Gestapo, and that's the FBI. We don't need 2 Gestapos, Eric. So he's pretty upset, Hoover, but he leaks this. And Donovan freaks out and says, how could this possibly be leaked? And you know who leaks it? Harry Hopkins, his communist advisor. And he leaks it. He's the source of all of this stuff. Is Harry Hopkins. And we'll eventually do an episode on Harry Hopkins because Harry Hopkins is a thorough communist. And he's in bed with J. Edgar Hoover. And I don't mean that physically, I mean politically. Even though Hoover is on the right, Hopkins on the extreme left, but Hoover doesn't want, anybody to take. Is this Hopkins?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the greatest comb-overs of all time. But obviously a dirty commie rat. And he's leaking all these incredibly internal secret documents. I mean, it's astounding what he's leaking to the press. This is the actual plans for CIA, actual plans for the president to sign the presidential order. And Hopkins and Hoover conspire to undermine the creation of CIA. And specifically, because Hoover does not want to be threatened by another, organization. It's really greedy on the part of Hoover. However, he goes to bed, gets a phone call the next day from Warm Springs, Georgia, and FDR is dead. And he sits there on his bed for 5 hours weeping with his head in his hands because he loved FDR so much. It's true. Donovan was in shock. He had seen him, some months before, and he looked terrible, Eric, near the end. He had seen him, what he looked like at Yalta, and he'd seen him. And by the way, these people believe that we got our clocks cleaned at Yalta. What Donovan believed was the Soviets deserved everything they got. And what are we going to do? Fight them over these countries? You know what I mean? Like at the end, they were physically in those countries, Eric. You know what I mean? Unless we decided to go to war against the Soviets to extract them from Bulgaria and Romania and East Germany and all these other places, what were you supposed to do? What are you going to do? Negotiate a way out of it with Stalin? It was an impossible situation. And a lot of people believed that we got robbed, because we were bad negotiators. I mean, when you've got 1 million troops in a country, there's not much room to negotiate.
Oh, and they invested a lot of blood. A whole lot of blood.
They began pulling out factories and food out of Romania and Poland on trains immediately. As soon as the war ended, they began I'm talking about rape and pillage. They took everything that wasn't nailed down, and the stuff that was nailed down, they unbolted it and took it back on trains to Moscow. They raped and pillaged, and all they extracted from him was the promise to allow elections in these countries. And they had already been taken over by communists. They'd already had communist takeovers of their government. And in fact, Donovan's men were getting rousted by the communists, and he was protesting to the Soviets about his men being abused and some of them killed by these communist thugs that had taken over Poland and Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and all these other countries. And he saw the handwriting on the wall, Donovan. He saw that this Cold War was going to be a hot war very quickly. And he said this to his men. He said this to the 4 guys I mentioned who will later become heads of the CIA. He said, we have an A-bomb now. We're going to have a little lull. He predicted every single thing. We're going to have a brief lull. And then the reason that they're so arrogant and so smug, the Soviets, is because they either have it or they're on the brink of having it. And that's why they're acting tough. And that was his interpretation of the Soviet negotiating stance. And he was correct. He was correct. They were on the eve of creating their own bomb, whether through stealing it, via the Rosenbergs, or making it. They were going to get it one way or the other. So he recovers and begins to contact this guy, this haberdasher from Missouri named Truman. And Truman doesn't want any part of this guy simply because he's a Republican. I mean, it's so petty. He's acting as if he's a congressman from a small district in Missouri. I mean, it's so bizarre how provincial Harry Truman was compared to, look at this douchebag. I mean, they should morph him into a Delaware Biden. I think if somebody could make a meme, I think you'd get the 2 guys together. They even look alike quite a bit. Anyway, so he doesn't want any part of Donovan because he looks at Donovan as a future presidential candidate. He tells his aides. He doesn't even want the OSS around, and he doesn't think we need an OSS. And Donovan is saying, look, even if you don't pick me, bro, you need an organization. We've proven that over the last 6 years, that you need something like the OSS for international intelligence. And he says, no, I don't want another Gestapo. He buys into this Gestapo thing that the CIA would domestically be spying on the Americans. And he didn't even like Hoover, by the way. He hated Hoover.
He's probably right, though. They eventually did do it.
Right. But I'm saying here's Hoover doing it already. He didn't like Hoover, so he didn't like anybody. The only one he liked was his wife. I mean, this guy, at one point, he begrudgingly recognized the state of Israel and told his former partner, who was Jewish from the haberdashery, the former partner came with a bunch of rabbis, a side story, into the Oval Office. And they said, look, you got to recognize the state of Israel, right? 1948. And he said, all right, look, I'm going to do it. I don't want to hear about this again. Don't ever come back. I never want to see you Jews in my office again. My wife doesn't let Jews in the house, and you guys can't come back in the Oval Office ever again. So his partner said, oh, thank you very much, sir. We'll never come back. And he recognized the state of Israel by the United States. But that's what it took, was this business partner of his, who, even though he was his business partner in the haberdashery, was never allowed in the house while Mrs. Truman was there, because as everyone knew, you couldn't allow Jews into your house when you were the wife and of the president. Those were the rules, and they were enforced by Bess Truman. That's the type of guy this douchebag was. Another Democratic douchebag from back in the day, who may have stolen that election, by the way, from Dewey. Anyway, so Dewey wants to run, and Dewey is no friend of Donovan either. Donovan tries to get back into New York politics to no avail, and he begins to go back to his law firm, and he begins to develop clients. He brings in famous clients, actresses and others, and they begin to make some money for the firm after the war. And he begins to rebuild his life, but he begins to have problems. Oh, by the way, in the movie, De Niro begins to have problems with his legs and he's on crutches. And that's really what happened, because Donovan had his legs all shot up and all kinds of stuff happened to him during World War I. And later in life, he began to have mobility problems. But his real problem was the fact that his brain was shrinking. And they took him to Walter Reed and they examined him, and he was beginning to have the early signs of dementia. And he started to forget things, and it happened pretty quickly in a couple of years, just like the current president of the United States. That is what happened to Donovan. And Donovan began to have some motor problems. He began to forget things. He began to forget who he was talking to. Very similar to Joe Biden at the end of Donovan, maybe the end of Biden too. Who knows? But the situation becomes worse. And that's when he's put into Walter Reed hospital. And Eisenhower begins to make some calls, and others begin to make calls that he's on his last legs. And they give him that fourth medal, and they come and pin it on his pajamas, literally, while he's in bed. He forgets who his wife is. It's one of those combinations of dementia and Alzheimer's, Eric.
Yeah, there's a thing about that portrait there on the left that had to be finished by a photograph because he couldn't handle the session. He went in the hospital not long.
Yeah. That woman was painting him in the hospital. Oddly enough, like she was really coming in. I think it was a woman who did it, right? She was coming in. Oh, I don't know, guy or woman, I forget. But they were coming. They were coming into the hospital, and it's just before this when his daughter-in-law, whatever she did with pills and alcohol, it might have been because of his dementia. At least that's what I always thought, that it was her depressed that he was losing it. He lives to 76, but when he dies in February of 1959. Hoover, Hollywood circles around and they want to make two movies. One is, or three, they actually make three movies. One is the OSS movie, and then there's the other one. There's the Cloak and Dagger was another one, 1940. They make those two movies in 46, and those are big hits for Warner Brothers. But they want to make, that's Cloak and Dagger, that's 1946. But the second movie is the better of the two. OSS is a much better movie than that one. But anyway, so in 1959, that's the Alan Ladd movie. Yeah. Geraldine Fitzgerald, two good ones. But in 1959, Hollywood is circling to make a movie about him. They want, now that he's dead, they want to, and his wife had handpicked a biographer, and he's working on a biography of him. And now that he's dead, Hollywood wants to make a movie to immortalize William Donovan. And Hoover gets wind of this. And what does Hoover do? He's worried about the reputation and the future of CIA without Donovan. He's worried about Donovan's legacy affecting him. From the grave, he leaks that Donovan did not die of dementia and Alzheimer's. He died of syphilis. That's how low J. Edgar Hoover went at the very end, leaking that a smear that Donovan had died from going insane from syphilis, which was completely the lowest of the low in terms of J. Edgar Hoover's maneuvers. I mean, this was a new level that even he had not reached before. Most people didn't buy it. It didn't really affect the legacy of Donovan because people had known him so well for so long. Too many high-powered people knew Donovan so well. And he had so many overseas. The funeral, everybody showed up for this thing. And they put a cornerstone into a new building near you that became CIA headquarters. And in that was Donovan's name, and everything that in the building was in the cornerstone.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, his legacy still lives on to this day, good or bad, any way you want to perceive it. OSS was what CIA was supposed to be before Dulles and these others ran it off the rails, is my take. But the CIA is only as good as its leadership, as was OSS. He was erratic, Donovan. It was the war years. He had an enemy that had to be defeated. I don't know if he would have been a good director of CIA. I don't know. We know what the legacy is from 1949 on. We know that Truman regretted creating it by 1963, and that Dulles came to him and told him to recant the editorial he had written for the Washington Post, but he refused to recant the editorial, saying that he did regret signing the National Security Act in 1947. So we know that, but the rest of it is subject to debate. We don't know what we don't know. In terms of the good that CIA did versus the evil, we really don't know. But the reality of it is they needed something. They needed some agency to filter all these things into one presidential brief in terms of intelligence information. And whether it was going to be DIA, which is then taken under the wing. By the way, OSS was under the auspices, technically and legally, of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That chopped up. The OSS gets chopped up into 2 or 3 parts. State Department takes a part of it. 6 months after the war, Truman signs a thing to dismantle the the OSS. They didn't wait 6 months to dismantle it. And he was saying, look, there's a lot of work to be done. There's Nazis running around. There's art. There's scientists. We got to do this work. And Truman says, no, I don't think so.
Didn't he have like 6 days?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's how quick Truman was, because he was a decisive guy. Remember, had that sign on his desk, the schmuck stops here.
Funny.
Anyway, I think that there's a lot of good stuff on Donovan. A couple of good books. This book I told you about, the John Liesel book, The Dirty Tricks Department, is pretty good, just on the dirty tricks and the counterfeit, the phony stamps that they put out, the postage stamps, the maps, the cards. I mean, this was all new. It sounds old now, because we've been through so many James Bond movies, but this was state of the art at the time, people. This was all new in terms of tradecraft. Nobody knew how to do this. They kind of learned some of it from the British, but a lot of it we made ourselves.
Yeah, forgeries were a major part of it, like giving orders that, were so convincing.
Yeah.
I think Japan, he actually brought in the right paper.
Oh,
the
yes.
right ink to get the exact orders. And
well, what about the Monopoly game, Eric, that they got to the concentration camps, the British? The Monopoly game, when you peeled it back, had maps of the area for escape.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. The British obviously ahead of us on this because they had been in power a lot longer than we were.
I think, what was it? He had been so effective on changing orders or forgery orders that one of the German generals had to get on the radio and say, I didn't write those stupid orders. They're not orders. They're not.
Well, the whole thing is so confusing because they're issuing orders to surrender. I mean, I don't know how you followed anything back then. They had broken the code and they were able to issue all kinds of radio directives. They were dropping leaflets to surrender from German generals. I mean, what a cluster of confusion near the end of the war. Not even near the end, the last year or so. I mean, it goes further than that until Hitler kills himself. Can I say that?
I think so.
Okay.
It's definitely an improvement. Oh my God.
Right.
But crazy story. Serious hero. But we have heroes in the audience too.
Heroes of the Blues? Oh, who is this?
Heroes of the Super Chats. Sergeant Willie, I was at Best Buy today and there's a large DVD display for Dr. Strangelove. Is this a hint from Hollywood?
It could very well be. It could be that we're talking about Sterling Hayden and OSS too.
Except I think Best Buy is eliminating physical media DVDs.
Do they still have DVDs there at Best Buy?
For now, I think they're getting rid of them now.
I got to get in there, Yeah,
you kind of have to.
Buy a drink on the way to Dallas on me. Okay.
Thank you, Booker Dog.
Oh, yeah. We're supposed to mention those virtual tickets, Eric.
Oh, yeah. Here's another one who's saying, good job, guys. See you in Dallas. I'm buying the first round. We are going to be in Dallas. And there are links in the description. You can still buy the tickets now. There's virtual tickets available. There's a coupon code for 15% off.
We can't make it any easier for you. I'm sorry. Listen to me, you fat bastards. You don't even have to get off your couch. Eric is giving you a discount. You watch it on your TV. You drink your Flagstaff beer, whatever you got going over there, with your dog. and you don't have to leave the house. I mean, come on. The virtual ticket, at least you'll see an all-star team of various people, and you can send it as a gift to your stupid nephew who doesn't believe anything.
Who's going to buy a download and keep
buy
downloading forever.
Right. If anybody argues with you, you could say, watch this, and make an idiot out of them. You could say, watch that. Wouldn't you like to be victorious with that crazy guy who you go to work with every day who still believes Oswald was the lone assassin? You could make a monkey out of him. Sure. All for 15% off.
All for 15% off. And you know what? Right. I haven't done this for a while,
right.
But I'm still going to say, hey, if you like this kind of stuff, you probably should subscribe here.
Okay, what about likes? Somebody mentioned to me that we have an inordinate amount or disordinate amount of likes related to viewership or something. Like people don't hit the like button. Does that mean anything?
Yeah, likes.
Is there some algorithm?
Yeah, likes tell YouTube that people like it, and they tend to roll it out further.
Okay.
Subscribing is like bookmarking the channel, and then people get to see it. All of this helps. And we're not going to harp on it, the subscribing,
not
but
harping on anything.
Definitely it's helpful over time. Tall Paul is saying Ian Fleming said he imagined James Bond looking like Hoagie Carmichael. I have read that.
Hoagie Carmichael? Really?
Yeah, that's what he based the visual. It's in the books. He described him as that. Thin, sharp, chiseled facial features, much like Sean Connery, oddly enough. Hey guys, great show. What are your thoughts on Annie Jacobson?
Possibly compromised. I don't know. She's got sources that seem to appear out of nowhere that talk to her, even though she's a housewife who lives in Pasadena. Her husband's a sniper, a Navy SEAL sniper, if I remember correctly. But she's got a lot of deep state sources. I mean, her book about Area 51, if you believe what she wrote in that book, is pretty crazy. Paperclip was documented by others. I mean, she's not the source of major stuff on Paperclip, but the Area 51 book, which is my favorite, the scientists from Area 51 tell her that they recovered the body of 2 children at Area 51 who had surgery of their heads, and it wasn't intentional surgery. It wasn't intentional surgery. That's right. It was surgery done by the Stalin regime that Stalin had been enamored that the Americans believed War of the Worlds, and that the entire alien space scare was part of a Soviet propaganda campaign, and they had dropped the spaceship off of a Russian plane over the Bering Strait. This is in her book. And it had glided all the way to New Mexico, where these dead kids who were dead already were the aliens that were inside of the vessel. And there's more in there, but she quotes the scientists from Area 51 as her source.
Wow, that's
it's a crazy story. And she, has multiple sources. She used to work for the LA Times. Not that that means anything, but she has far too many deep state sources to look legit. I'll just leave it at that.
All right, fair enough. Super sticker from John S. Thank you very much. BTK, was FDR a commie? Pretty close.
He was a commie adjacent. His wife was definitely a commie. I mean, I think FDR. I'm sorry, go on. You can read the rest of it.
I was going to say, Eleanor and many in the administration, without a doubt, were. Senator McCarthy was right, and we needed to deport or sabotage this deeper threat.
I've said this, as you know, I've said this repeatedly, so this is not new. Was he? I think he was more of a pragmatic socialist, if that makes any sense. Surrounded by commies, he claimed he was able to delineate. I don't know.
Yeah, what I don't like about him is he's the reason why we are confused about the word liberal, because he really is a progressive, not a liberal, but progressive had a bad rep at the time. So he said, I'm a liberal. Mm-hmm. And that's how it is stuck to this day, that liberal and leftists in America are screwed up because of FDR.
What's going on over there, homie? You doing some plumbing over there?
I'm doing some plumbing.
What's going on? I hear metal jar. What's going on down there?
Something came in the mail.
Oh, okay. I don't know what came in this mail. All of a sudden, he's got mail
Something came in the mail.
Oh, look at
very
that.
Helpful.
Whoa, that's great, Huntley. That is really pretty.
I think there might be one heading your way, too.
Wait a minute. What's that back there on that wall? What is that? Touche, my friend. Touche, already hung.
Already hung.
Already hung. I'm well hung.
Well.
Anyway, it's great to have that plaque,
Yes, and
it's pretty heavy too. It feels like it's got some weight to it.
Yes, and that's because many of you did remember.
There's 100,000 people out there who are sitting there. You should thank them for doing this, because we didn't do anything. We just got on here, started blabbing these stories, and then 100,000 people said, "I'd like to take this ride." So tip of the hat to them, and tip of the hat to the people who are donating money for the book fund, allowing me to buy these books on PayPal and Cash App and Venmo, wherever the hell you want to send it. The little $5 stuff adds up. Some of these books, I wanted to get the new Grodin book was $100. The new picture book by Robert Grodin, who we will be seeing in Dallas. So maybe I can extract a copy out of him when he's not looking or something. I don't know what the deal is. We'll find out.
Nice. Well, you just shared this book with me on our subject, and
I'd love to get this book.
And some odd dollars.
How much is this book?
I think it's like $108. I don't remember, but
dude, I'd love to have this book, A to Z of Sex. This is all the history of honeypotism around the world, by Nigel West. So I'd love to save.
I'm going to try to find the PDF if I can, if there is one. But
okay. Well, we got fiction has to be plausible. History doesn't. It's interesting.
Yeah,
well, something's got to be plausible. I mean, any story you tell has to be plausible.
Well, truth is stranger than fiction. That's quite literally true. I mean, sometimes some of the stories that you come up with is like, you can't write that out.
Oh, right. Yeah,
it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Al Gonzalez, my neighbor in Jersey, was a World War II German infantryman. After the war as a POW, he said Patton was drilling them to fight the Soviets.
Yeah, I mean, they took a bunch of Nazis immediately and flipped them. That was what part of the thing Donovan was doing. And then we took in the whole Galen organization, and we took in, you could see 2 episodes that we did on Operation Paperclip. That was all designed to go against the Soviets, the next war.
Yuri Nosenko was reportedly held in a CIA safe house estate Philston in Sparks, Glencoe, Maryland, near my home. Yeah. Bright lights weren't turned off for years.
Oh, yeah. I don't know about bright lights, but they tortured him physically for years and years and years. And he never buckled. He never buckled, Nosenko. And they also thought LBJ was the killer of JFK. So they didn't like
tough stock.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's kind of like that scene in The Sopranos. I don't know if you ever saw, was one of the Russians in the woods, and they shot him and everything. He just like kept walking off, and they could.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah,
we never know what happened to the dude. It's like one of those great Easter eggs.
I've got one name for you, Rasputin. Look what it took to kill Rasputin.
Oh, dude, that was scary. That dude was insane.
Yeah, we covered that in the first episode, Neil.
Yep.
We covered that. Yeah, thanks.
And then you both look great in darker colors. Great show. As a fat bastard, I will watch virtually.
Good on you, no, that's the way to go, bro. Be the leader of men. You could do this. Just, order the thing virtually and sit back. Take the ride. I mean, the tickets are sold out anyway. You can't really get in. So, maybe there's bootleg tickets. Maybe there'll be guys outside selling boots. Who knows what's going to go on.
There may be a waiting list. I don't know, but you can always click on that site and see if,
Oh, yeah. You know what? Click on the site. See if anything's available, because she said she may expand it. I don't know what that physically means.
Oh, well, if they could open up.
I think maybe she can, maybe a wall moves or something, because at one point she said it was possible, but I don't know.
Yep. Pine Barrens. That was the name of that episode of The Sopranos.
Sopranos. Yeah. Pine Barrens.
Truly classic episode. But to further support us, there's PayPal. There's always Locals.
Oh, Locals. Yeah. What happens now?
Well, this is when Oswald is going to lead the way as a great companion.
Well, I'll tell you something. There are documents I put up on Locals for the members only the other day that are worth the price of admission, which I think is like $5 a month or something.
But even for a year, even cheaper.
Right. I mean, you could read those. I'm still reading those documents. I mean, I think Hunley put up a copy of Steele this book the other day, which is kind of interesting because the alma mater of Abbie Hoffman is Brandeis University, that's now fighting back against the Palestinian pro-Hamas Nazis that have taken over the universities. And I wonder, what is going to happen with Brandeis, because that's a leading Jewish institution in the United States.
Yeah.
It's in the book. It's in his book. He mentions it in his biography. I don't know about Steele's book if it's in there, but it's in a couple of his other books.
Well, if everybody wants to continue and hang out for a few minutes for our locals after party, where we're going to answer locals tips and things that are coming in on locals, you can follow us there for free. You don't have to pay anything. You can actually follow. And
what does it cost to get in? How much does it cost to get in?
If you want to support us, it's $5 a month, but it costs nothing to go there and look at it, see the rest of this.
I'm going over there right now.